Welcome back to another episode of On the Clock with Steve Shoup. I'm your host, Megan Shoup, and we are, of course, back to talk NFL draft. I'm, of course, joined by my brother, Steve Shoup. And you can follow, by the way, me on Twitter at Megs08DFS. You can follow Steve on Twitter at SteveOSpeaks. Steve, how are you hanging in there? I think less than 50 days to the draft. You hanging in there, bud?
Doing well, getting excited.
Yeah,
Gonna
it
be a
is.
good year. A lot of uncertainty up top.
Right. Yeah, it's coming quick. And that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today. We want to talk about there's kind of a narrative that this year, doesn't have as many blue chip players, a little bit weaker class overall. Seems like there's not as much consensus top to bottom. And each year varies as far as kind of consensus goes and that's kind of stuff. And there could be a variety of factors, but there doesn't seem to be as much consensus, which makes it very interesting for very different big boards, both in analysts and of course on draft week. And so, I guess the big picture, why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's a tough tough question because if you look at this class and there's not there's not one position group where you say, "Wow, that's just super weak this year." Like you know, it's just terrible top to bottom, or there's no big names. There some positions that yes, we don't have that elite guy who's going to go one overall quarterback. I think there's a situation where there's like three or four guys who could go number one overall, who's at a different position. And
Hmm.
typically, when it hasn't been a quarterback, it's because it's somebody we know, like a Jadeveon Clowney, a Miles Garrett, somebody like that, who is just gonna take that top spot. So I think that's part of it. But really, I look at each position group, and both in terms of top talent and kind of the depth of what you kind of expect through the first 3-4 rounds, and it's strong. I mean, that's what a draft is made up of. Yes, you want to find guys rounds fifth, sixth, and seventh, but if you're still finding quality guys for the role that you're expecting, either key backups or slot receivers, slot corners, things like that in the third and fourth round, you're doing well, and I think you can do that this year.
Right.
So to me, this is a good. It's not the greatest draft of all time, but it's a good draft. And what I like is there's not a lot of weak positions. Some
Right.
years that is, you just know like there's no running backs this year worth taking, or only one or two. You know that you can't really point to any one position where that's the case.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a great point. And this is another great point or segue to talk about if you use on the clock, we have a lot of different big boards and we're adding new big boards each week as the draft gets closer. The nice thing about that is again, there isn't consensus and there's not consensus on the NFL draft weekend. And so it really is truly simulating the NFL draft because you can choose between the different big boards you want to use. You can also choose that the computer uses and simulates the draft with your big board or a different one if you have our premium subscription. So, it really makes it a lot more realistic and it's a really good way to see the kind of the variability of the draft and the wide ranging big boards and rankings. And so check out on the clock. Good way to learn about prospects. And you then may not be so surprised draft weekend when you say, why the hell did this guy fall the first round? Or why did they reach for this guy? Well, the big boards are very, very different. So I just wanted to make that point. But with that said, let's talk about the different positions. And in this episode, we're just going to talk the offensive positions. Next episode, we'll talk the defensive positions. But let's talk offense and let's go position by position and kind of talk about the depth of that position. So quarterback, we know there's no Joe Burrow. We know there's no elite talent. We've heard it's a weaker class. But kind of how do you see this position's depth overall?
Yeah. So while there's no Joe Burrow, what we do have though, I think we have six guys capable of being starting quarterbacks. Now, not all six are going to be starting quarterbacks, but that's a
Right.
good amount. And last year it was five, and people kind of then trying to who's going to be the sixth, and kind of the same in 2018 where Mason Rudolph was the sixth, and So again, I don't think we have the upside where one of these guys is going to be Josh Allen or one of these guys. I mean, we still don't know how last year's class is going to end up being,
Right.
even though we had 5 first rounders. So um, while last year's class had a ton of upside with guys like Lance and Fields and Trevor
Fields, yeah.
Lawrence, I mean, those guys do have the upside to be really elite. But I mean, none of them, took the NFL by storm by any stretch. But
Right.
this year we have the 6 guys. We know all the names. Whatever order you want it, Pickett, Willis, Corral, kind of the top 3 guys, and that could be in any order. And then you have Hal, Ritter, and Carson Strong as the next 3 guys. And so that's 6 guys who are probably going to go in the top 50. One, we don't have many drafts that do that. And two, um, you know, so we might not get any elite quarterbacks from this, but even if you get a couple really good starters, that's better than some of the drafts that were supposed to have elite talents. I mean, 2016, we saw Goff and Wentz go 1 overall. Wentz is now on his 3rd team. Goff is barely hanging on with the Lions. The best quarterback from that class by far was Dak Prescott in the 4th round.
Right.
But that was a 3 quarterback draft. We're not talking about any other quarterbacks from 2016.
Right.
Same 2017 draft. Mitch Trubisky, kind of a bust 1st round. He'll probably get another go around this year. Of course, Watson and Mahomes were studs, but nobody knew that at the time. If people thought that these guys were going to be the studs that they became, they obviously would have gone to 1 overall. They would have
Right.
gone in top 5. So, it's easy to look in hindsight and say, oh, this draft is, and then again, nobody else after those 3 guys from 2017 are in the discussion for quarterback play around the league. So we see that time and time again. And yeah, some of these guys, 4 years from now, some of these guys are going to be barely hanging on, maybe even
Right.
out of the league or
Right.
onto a 2nd team. But some of these guys will be starters. And I think it could be a little better than the 2014 class. That was the infamous Johnny Manziel class. But Blake Bortles went early, and then you had Bridgewater at the end of the 1st, Carr and Garoppolo in the 2nd. I think this is a little better than that. And again, given team needs, I mean, if they ran that draft again, obviously Carr is going in the 1st round, Garoppolo is going in the 1st round. So I think it's kind of a mixture of 2014, 2017. So I mean that's a good class. Is it great? No, we might not end up with a Hall of Fame quarterback from it, but I still think we get a couple starters, and that's way better than what people are giving it credit for.
Okay. Now let's move on to the other skill positions and talk about the running back position.
Yeah, I mean, running back, we've seen a number of years in recent years where not only are there no 1st rounders, but it gets thin, and it gets thin fast.
Right.
This past draft was not a strong running back draft. And I think this year's class is far better than last year's class. I mean, guys like Kenneth Walker, Bryce Hill, Isaiah Spiller. I mean, you just keep going down. There's a lot of guys who I think are going to be 2nd, 3rd, 4th round picks, guys who, if they get the opportunity, could start or produce as rookies. So I look at this as a better class than last year, probably better than the year before, kind of close. But again, this is not a top class where you're going to have a guy obviously drafted like Saquon Barkley or Christian McCaffrey in the top 10, but somebody could sneak into the end of the 1st round, maybe a Walker or Hall, depending on team needs. But I think this is a pretty strong class. Kind of similar to a couple of years ago where we had a bunch of 2nd rounders. Jonathan Taylor was a huge success. Antonio Gibson was a 3rd rounder that year. So, I think this could kind of be a class similar to that. And we've already seen some home runs from that class.
Sure. Okay, now on to the wide receivers. Same thing doesn't maybe sound like there's, a Jamar Chase, but
Yeah.
what do we have?
Well, and that's just it. Like, people are comparing it to last year's class that had 3 elite talents at the top. And I think I know not every board is as high in him, but I think Garrett Wilson can be that guy. I think he can be an alpha number 1 receiver in this league. I think he'll go in the top 10, especially given some of the team needs that we see there, particularly with a team like the Jets, with a couple of picks there. But, just behind him, we just saw it at the combine. I mean, these guys were just blazing. There's a lot of speed, a lot of athleticism in this group.
Right.
We're going to see 5 or 6 guys in the 1st round, another couple, maybe 4 more in the 2nd round. That's on par with what we see every year. I I absolutely think this is better than the class 2 years ago, which had some studs like a CD Lamb and hopefully Russell Wilson is hoping Jerry Jeudy will become a stud now that he can be
Yeah,
his quarterback. But Brandon Ayuk was in that class, Justin Jefferson. But Jefferson was taken in the later half of the first round, and
that's
then
wild to think about
and
now
then and
watching it.
then that second round, you saw guys like Pittman and T. Higgins. So I
Hmm.
see this class very similar to that.
Okay.
Um, the depth of that class was in 15 to 45,
Mm.
and I see the exact same thing here. I mean, Chase Claypool was a second rounder in that class, so I see the exact same thing in this class. Some of it is because like Alabama receivers like Jameson Williams and
Right.
Mechie, they got injured. I mean, if they
Hmm.
were not injured, they'd probably be, especially Williams he would be a top five guy. So there's just a lot of talent in among the first 10, 15 guys in this class. I think if you need a receiver, you're going to be pretty fine finding one in through the second to early third round, and that's exactly what you want.
Okay, well, I hope the Washington Commanders go in that direction because that would be kind of fun to have another like a Justin Jefferson alongside Terry McLaurin with Carson Wentz. All right, tight end position. Let's talk about the depth of that position.
Yeah, I mean, this position last year had the exception, the Kyle Pitts, the
Right.
elite top 10 guy, but we don't see that. We had not seen that since, Vernon Davis. I mean, Eric Ebron was taken fairly high, a few others in the top 15, 20. But I mean, you're lucky if there's a first rounder. Typically, it's a couple second rounders and more. But most years we talk about in last year after Pitt's tight end class really dropped off the year before was considered really bad. Cole Kmet, Adam Troutman were the best guys. And they've really not done much. I mean, this group, Weidemeyer and Trey McBride. I mean, I think they're both could push for a late first round pick. But it goes beyond that. You have a number of guys. Record from Ohio State, the kid from UCLA. I mean, these guys could be day one starters. I mean, they're not going to be elite tight ends. I don't think the guy like Travis Kelsey and George Kittle, neither one of those were first rounders. But these could be like your next Dalton Schultz's of the league and guys like that. And I mean, those are good starters. I mean,
Right.
Dalton Schultz just got the franchise tag, so we know what the Cowboys think of him. So I think this is from top to bottom, as good of a tight end class that we've seen in probably the Evan Ingram, OJ Howard, and Njoku class. That
Okay.
also had guys like Gerald Everett and a few others in it. So,
Right.
it's a very strong comparable group that I think teams, again, who need a top tight end, you're going to be able to find one in the first couple of rounds. So, and that's typically not the case.
Right, absolutely. Well, now let's talk offensive line. And I know there are some top tackles being discussed as going maybe number one overall, top five, top 10. Discuss, though, the depth and picture of just the offensive line as a whole.
Yeah, and this is just another situation where you compare to recent classes. You know, I think you have three guys who are going to go in the top 10. Evan Neal, Ikem Ikwono are both are being talked about as going one overall, and then you have Charles Cross as well, who I think probably goes in the top 10. I mean, three top 10 tackles is really good, and the talent is there. These guys aren't just getting pushed to the top 10 like I feel like some people point to. I think these guys are comparable to the Penny Swools, Rashard Slaters from last year,
Hmm.
the Andrew Thomases and all the guys taken the year before. Um, uh, you know, I, 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 it can be a little tougher to judge offensive line year to year because who they faced in college and all that. But I mean, I would put Evan Neal and um, Ikwanu against anyone. I don't know if you took the top three tight ends from the last, say, 3 or 4 years, those guys would finish 1, 2, but I think they would be in the discussion of all those offense tackles. So
Tackles, yeah.
when I see that level of talent, and then you see depth, you see guys like Trevor Penning, you see Ryman, Lucas around later. I mean, you see the depth that you see. This is not just a three-man tackle class by any stretch, and Also, interior-wise, you see Lindenbaum at center, uh, Green, you see Zion Johnson, you see a lot of guys in that late first, early second round in that department as well. So the depth here is, as good. I don't think this is like the best offensive line class of all time, but I think it's strong top to bottom with good depth, and that's what you should want. So again, I think teams who have picks in these first three rounds are going to find the guys that they need, and I just think, I don't know, it's a little overblown, the idea that the this class is weaker than say last year's or the year before. So no, I think there's a lot of I don't know what I don't know if there's one single thing that points to it, but I think maybe because there hasn't been the consensus like one or two guy this year,
Right.
um, that has led to, everyone has a question mark, but to be fair, everyone should have a question mark. I mean, we we've seen that with a number of top talents. Penny Sewell had some struggles last year with the Lions at left tackle, or at tackle. He played a little both. Chase Young for Washington Commanders. He was considered the can't miss. His first 6-7 games, he struggled as a
Mm-hmm.
rookie. He turned it on the second half. They went to the playoffs. Last year, he struggled again before he got hurt. He's
Mm-hmm.
starting to pick it up again. So, I mean, we hype these guys so much to say can't miss, and I mean, I see the same concerns that should be seen, kind of like when you look back 2-3 years down the line at some of these other prospects who are still good players, but maybe didn't have the immediate impact that you're hoping for. And I just think people, it'd be good for analysts to have more hindsight to look at, uh, and then take that. See, when you look back and say, oh, this guy maybe struggled in this one area, and then you see, well, this prospect is also struggling in that one area, and marry those together and say, hey, these guys are the same, just different year, different name. And so no, I think the hype that this class is down this year is just overblown, and I think
Sure.
it mainly comes from not having the consensus
I,
guys.
I was just going to say, just to summarize, I think it really is not having that consensus. In years past, it was okay, this is absolutely the number one quarterback. This is absolutely the number one edge guy. This is absolutely number one tackle, receiver. If you want to put names on it, Jamar Chase or Joe Burrow or, Chase Young. There were names that were just consensus, and I totally agree with you. Out of curiosity, you talk about how there is really good depth. While there may not be consensus on a top guy in each of these positions, you just pointed out that there is great depth and are a lot of great players that are going to be great NFL starters, of top to bottom along the offense in all these positions. Which offensive position would you say in a whole is the strongest?
I mean, offensive line is pretty strong, but I'd probably say wide receiver. I think
Yeah.
it is extremely talented. You know,
Like you said, from like 15 to like 50, you could get a lot of
yeah. Oh, yeah. You're going to get some
lot of
really
meat
good
on the bone
starters.
there,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
some
Yeah.
really good starters from that group. So,
Right.
yeah, and I think the one other thing that I'd mention is sometimes in years past, when for an instance, there was a position group that I would say as strong as this wide receiver group. Sometimes it gets pushed up because of weaknesses in other spots, but I don't really see that. I know we'll get into defense next time, but we know the defensive line is stacked, both edge and interior guys. Off-ball linebackers, corners, even some safeties. In other years, some of those positions were just completely missing.
Like
Like there,
Darren. Yeah.
yeah, there were years where there was not a first round safety, there was not a first round interior linebacker. This year, there's guys at both of those positions. There are years where maybe only, you know, three defensive tackles go. I mean, we could see six. So, the point is, every position has enough depth this year. So it's not, I don't know if we're going to see the runs at certain positions that we've seen in years past, where it's like, kind of where we talked about wide receiver being similar to 2 years ago. Because of some other weaknesses at some key positions, you did have that at the end of the first round, kind of Ayuk, Lamb, Jefferson, and then Higgins and Pittman, and like one other guy go in the first like
Early
5, 6 picks
second.
of the second round. So
Yeah.
you just had a big rush of guys. You might not see that this year, just because now these teams can go grab somebody else that they like.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes a ton of sense. I think this is very informative to kind of give like a big picture analysis at like the depths of every position. And we're going to do the same thing for the defensive side of the ball next week. So before you guys get out of here, be sure to like this episode, subscribe to the Fanspeak Network. We just started, we're trying to grow it. So subscribe and tell a friend. We'll be back next week to talk about the defensive side of the ball. And we'll be back every week talking NFL draft leading all the way up to the 2022 drafts. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.